So, as mentioned, I've been doing tech for over 25 years. Technically, I actually started when I was 8 years old, so that was a lot longer. Like when I started, programming my first computer, Pac-Man was new, right? I've been in this for a while, and in the last sort of 10, 15 years, it's been very, very much product, more and more product. And I think that I actually learned everything I ever needed to know about product before I was 5 years old. Except it took me like 30 years to figure that out, right? And so looking back on it now, I can see like a lot of lessons that came through. So today we're just going to talk about product for a little bit. And one of the things to start with is that I think product management is a misnomer. And I don't think it actually makes a lot of sense because you don't manage anything in product, right? We tend to call it product ownership rather than product owner rather than product manager because you're not managing. And managing confuses things because it also sounds like project managing, right? And the thing is that project managers have plans and product managers have vision. It's a very, very different world, right? And they work completely differently. So in product, there's a lot that holds it together, and there's a lot of different ways of looking at how product sits together. But one of the main things, and we'll run through a few things with you about it, but one of the main things is team, right? So product managers don't work alone, right? Product managers actually don't create anything that anybody can use outside of their team, right? Everything that they create is actually something that they use with the other people on their team, right? It's something that they use with their stakeholders, right? But they don't actually create anything themselves. So product managers are really only as good as their team. And so in recent times, teams have evolved in all kinds of different ways. So I tend to talk about teams in terms of agile tech development. Does anybody know what agile is? Right? A few people. So, and I'll talk about that, but in agile tech development, you use really small teams of people to create everything. Right? And everybody uses Agile out there. So whether you're Facebook or you're Google or you're every single startup in San Francisco and probably about 60% of them in Los Angeles, they're all using Agile. And they're all using these small teams that are multidisciplinary, that know what they're doing, that have all the skills that they need to create anything that needs to be created. But the thing about a team is what are the qualities of the members of your team. Right? That's really important to product people because, as I said, you actually don't create much. What happens is you're actually working with other people who create. And so for you to do that, it takes a certain type of person. And so some of the things to think about with product people and with teams that you're looking for is you're looking for people who have all kinds of interesting attributes. One of them is that they're open. Right? Open people are great. What that means is people who are willing to talk about things and who aren't shy and don't hold back. Or even if they are shy, when they actually do speak, they have something to say, and they're easy to bring it out there. Another one is honest. Trust is a big part of teams. Like any team that works together has to have trust, otherwise it doesn't work. Right? It just falls apart. There's actually a great study that Google did, which was called Project Aristotle. It took about 5 years, as all things do in Google, and it was tons of data. So what they did is they were trying to figure out what makes a productive team productive. Like, what's the difference between a team over here that produces constantly really good stuff all the time and a team over here that doesn't? And so they gathered tons of data together, and they kept gathering this data, and they kept looking for trends. And they could not find them. 4 years later, they were still looking for trends, and they couldn't figure it out. And then suddenly, they were looking at these two teams, and one of them had half of the same members as the other team. But one of these teams was just soaring, very, very powerful, and the other one was stagnating and wasn't moving anywhere. And they specifically went and observed these two teams, and then the penny dropped, and they realized the difference between the two teams. So one team had what they call psychological safety, and the other did not. So what that meant was, on one team, somebody would just in the middle of something that they were talking about to do with the product start telling a story about their lives, right? And about what was going on and so on. And just be completely open. Like there was nothing wrong with them just talking, and nobody was kind of going, shut up, let's get back to work. They were just listening to each other and riffing off of each other and getting ideas. And so everybody felt comfortable and able to talk, and they were completely open and honest about what they were talking about. Whereas on the other team, there was one character who just made everybody tense. You know that person, right? You walk in the room, you sit down with them, and you start to talk, and if you're not completely on topic and saying exactly what that person wants, you can feel their whole body like tightening up and so on, and you just feel that tension. And what it did is it stopped the team working. So they took this idea and they started looking at more teams, and they realized that a team of super brilliant people and a team full of beginners, right? If this team with the super brilliant people did not have psychological safety, and this one did, this team actually outperformed the more skilled team. And the reason that happened is because these guys couldn't agree and move things forward. Whereas these guys would constantly be looking for a solution together and figuring it out and moving forward. So they actually moved faster and were more productive than a more skilled team. That was the point where Google stopped hiring only PhDs, right? And started hiring all kinds of other people because they were hiring on a different metric, right? So this is data-driven, it's science, it's completely empirical, and so people kind of go, oh, no, that sounds really hippie. It's not, right? Psychological safety, the openness, the ability to talk. So another thing is empathetic, right? Who here thinks they're an empathic person? I have a lot of empathy. Okay? So statistically, a few of you are wrong. Right? Empathy is not as common as you might think, and empathy is not something that you have at birth, right? It's something that you learn, right? And if you're not taught empathy as a child, you can still learn it as an adult, right? Empathy does not mean putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? Because that's still you in their shoes. It means seeing the world through that person's filters, right? It means truly understanding that person so that you can understand what they are seeing, what they're experiencing, and work through it. So empathy is a massive, massive topic. I could talk about it all day long, but it's hugely important. And for product, it's everything. Because your job is essentially to be a nexus between business, technology, and design. And you have to be able to talk to everybody differently, which means you need to understand each person differently. You need to understand your users, you need to understand your teammates, you need to understand everybody. Like, empathy is like one of the biggest tools that any product manager could ever have. So there's empathy, there's knowledge. So people who are naturally knowledgeable, who like learning about things and finding out about things and knowing more about things, right, they have a bigger base to pull ideas from. Like, they have a bigger well of content that they can pull from and compare to, right? So having people on your team who are knowledgeable is really important. And intelligent. And we kind of define intelligent by, the ability to make connections between things that you wouldn't imagine are normally connected. That's essentially how intelligence manifests itself. Right? You start seeing, and you know these people, right? You can see it, and you know it in yourself. When you make a connection between two things, you feel smarter, right? It seems completely disparate. So these are just, not everybody's going to have all of this, right? But this is what you're looking for in yourself, and this is what, as a product manager, and what you're looking for in a team around you. A team that has this as their core naturally does it better than a team that doesn't, all right? In the world that we're talking about. So there are exceptions to that. Apple is not like that, right? Apple is absolutely cutthroat. If you are not good enough, you failed, you're out. People get kicked out of teams all the time. Apple doesn't even have an HR department. No HR. They have recruiters, and then when somebody gets kicked out and fired, they just pay them off, right? Because it's cheaper than having an HR department. They don't care. They just want the best of the best of the best. And it's a strong culture, and it works really well for Apple. But it's not the kindest place to work. And then, on the other hand, you'll have slave drivers like Elon Musk, right? Where people are hugely, they feel this pressure to constantly perform and perform and perform. Again, great companies do great things, right? And the people are passionate and driven and loyal. So it's not to say that this is the only way to work, but if you are truly working in an agile team and in an agile way, this really helps people innovate, right? So rather than having a single person innovating somewhere, the team can get together and actually be really productive. So in product, you're kind of surrounding yourself with people who do these things. Another thing to think about is story. So, stories. So, story is like, it's like the unit of culture. If you think about culture and what that means, culture is driven by traditions. It's driven by whether the story is whether it's a cave writing on a wall or it's a law in a law book, so-and-so versus so-and-so, it's a story. Right? Stories kind of define human beings and define our culture and define who we are. And so story is something that we adopt into business and we adopt into product management. Product managers are storytellers, most of them, right? Because they have to be. If you think about it, if I'm talking to you, I need to tell a certain kind of story because you're going to understand that and I understand who you are and you need to hear it a certain way. But if I talk to you, you have a different background. So I need to make the same point, but I'll tell you a slightly different story, right? Storytelling is the way that we work. And story finds itself throughout the entire product process. So in product, you have a UX designer. A UX designer's job is to understand people's stories. Like, what do they do when they get up in the morning, and where do they go, and what are they thinking, and why are they doing it? All of these things are the things that make up the story, who, what, why, and when. And so the UX designers tell stories in their own ways, right? An engineer is telling a story about how this thing works, right? They're saying when this happens, and this happens, and if that happens, this happens, and so on. So they're telling an interactive story, but essentially it's a story of their programming, right? As product managers, we tell stories. We actually call them user stories, right? On purpose, because we're actually talking about what the user does. So stories are like a fundamental part of what we do. And because of this, there's been this growing swell in the world of designing products, which has everything to do with the humans at the center of it, right? And one of those things is design thinking. So, contrary to popular belief, design thinking has very little to do with design, right? It has more to do with thinking like a designer, right? Thinking like a creative person and applying that to what you do. So, a very logical person will kind of break things down into its pieces. It will take something, cut it up into small bits, and try and understand it. A creative person looks at everything as a story, looks at how things are emerging, looks at things from different angles and tries to see them in different ways. You'll see it when somebody's painting, they paint layer over layer over layer. They don't just paint once and then they're done, right? Most of the time, it's a design process that comes out of it. They try things, they try something else, it works, it doesn't work. If you, in the old days where architects weren't using computers, the thing that they bought more of was erasers rather than pencils, right? Because they were constantly erasing stuff and redrawing it and trying new things out and moving things in different ways, right? That process of thinking, that way of approaching things, that's what's emerged as one of the most powerful tools that we have. And so design thinking has evolved as a way of approaching any problem. So for example, the design thinking comes maybe from the Stanford B School and the design school. And up there, they have tours of people from all of the Fortune 500 companies in the world and others coming through there to spend weekends to learn how to do design thinking. And what they do is things like, hey, we're designing a product for doctors. So they actually have a room where they go in, and when you do it, you put on a doctor's coat, and you lay out a table, and you pretend that there's somebody there, and somebody dresses a nurse and whatever, and you sit there, and these are executives working through this idea and play acting and working through to figure out what's going through their minds, what are the problems that come up and so on. And then they try it in different ways, and then it fails, and they try something else, and they keep going back through it. And so what it's doing is it's teaching them how to live a story, somebody else's story, and through that understand better what they need to create. right? So design thinking is this wonderful tool that's emerged all around story. On the other side, there's things like Lean UX, which has emerged. So Lean UX is a way of user experience. It's figuring out a user's experience by trying it out on them. So you do something, you try it out. You see how it works, and then you come back, right? So you're creating an experience, right, for people, and then keep going back over it and over it and over it again. So it's essentially just telling stories and feeding them back into the stuff. So you have this wonderful team, and they have this ability to kind of carve things into stories and to understand who people are and how they work and what they need. But that's not where it ends, right? So you've got this great team as a foundation, you're creating stories, and then you actually have to take action, right? So you've now got a bunch of stories in mind and a kind of an understanding of what it is you want to create and where you want to take this. You understand who your user is a little bit, you understand what their problems are, you're starting to think about what your product is, right? Like what is this thing that's going to actually help in this situation, right? Now, a lot of people will sort of sit down and think about it, and then they'll think about it some more, and then they'll do some research, and then they'll think about it some more, and then they'll do more research, and they'll keep going and going and going. And you basically get paralysis by analysis, where nothing actually gets done because you're so busy thinking about all the things that you need to think about. And this happens in large companies a lot. I go into a lot of enterprises to train them on this stuff, and a lot of it happens because they want to be certain, they want to be sure, they want to be 100% before they do anything. And it's not really how it works, right? You just can't wait until it's perfect because it never is, right? You need to pick up and go and take action. And so as a product person, there are various ways of taking action. So one of the things that we do a lot of is rapid prototyping. So what this means is you're going out there and you're creating some version of the thing that you want to build or any idea that you have, and you're kind of going, okay, I'm going to create a hypothesis, right? That says, I think that this is true. Because these stories seem to be true, so I'm going to say that this thing is true. So I'm going to create a hypothesis around that, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to test it, right? I'm going to test it by rapid prototyping and going out into the world. So I was at one company, for example, and I went in, and they're a company that sells tickets, and they had this idea that what they were going to do is they were going to go and take toys, right, and put little codes on the toys so that people could scan them, and then it would take them to somewhere where they would get tickets to see something related to that toy, right, to go and see a show or whatever. And they'd done a bunch of analysis, right? So they'd gone out, and the BI team, and the business intelligence team had gone out and done a lot of analysis, and then their procurement team went and they started making partnerships and having discussions with Target and having discussions with the toy manufacturers and discussing what it was going to take to print new covers for these toys, new boxes for these toys that have the codes on. And they started all this process up, and of course they were doing financial projections, and it was like this was going to cost $7 and $8 million just to kick it off and get it going for the season, and that was fine, and everybody was good to go. And I got in there to help them in their product team, and I was like, whoa, can we test this? Can we figure out first, before we go through all this, we've done this or not, let's figure out if it works, right? Of course, what I suggested, they said, absolutely not, we can't do that, so we went ahead and did it anyway. And what we did is we went to, and we printed a bunch of labels of QR codes, right? So labels cost us a few bucks, plus the printing. And these QR codes, essentially, they just linked you to a YouTube video about a particular toy, right? Something that somebody had made that was interesting. And we then hired somebody from a third-party company to go into the stores, a couple of the stores where they thought that they were going to be selling these things. And they went in and they stuck these QR codes on all the toys, right? And they stuck exactly 100 in each store, right? And then we went back every day for a few days. We sent somebody back there to see when they were finished, right? So when all of them were off the shelf and there was no more QR codes left on the shelf, all the toys were gone. And then we looked at the numbers to see how many, if 100 in this store and 100 in that store, how many people actually scanned the code, right? Guess. 2. We got 2, right, in one store, right? And we went, okay, this is a bad idea. And we went back and we saved the company $7 million to begin with, right? And so having a hypothesis and testing it out is more important than you could ever imagine. And it's way, way more powerful than doing research for 6 months, right? Research can tell you lots of things, but nothing can tell you as much as if you take action and go out into the world and figure out what's out there. So taking action is great, and you learn a lot from doing it. Then decisions. That's a really big thing for product people. As I said, a lot of product people and a lot of people want to be certain about things before they move forward. But here's the thing, you can't be certain about everything. So what we do is we have to make decisions. But then how do you make these decisions? Like if you're not sure, how do you know you're going to move ahead? How do you know you should move ahead? And so making decisions is an art, right? You have to be certain that you are happy to move ahead, right? But you can't be 100% certain. So you have to be comfortable with the idea of making a decision that you can change if you have to. When you make that decision, you have to make it with solid confidence, right? You can't make it like halfway and doubting yourself and so on. You just have to make a solid choice. And so when you've done this and you've done your testing and you've done these actions, then you have to make decisions about your product, right? And so what we do as product managers is you make solid, educated guesses, essentially, right? You get as much information as you can, but at the end of the day, you're guessing. And you have to be okay with the fact that you're guessing, right? And because the whole companies can rely on your guesses, right? But you make a decision, you make a choice, right? And at that point, you actually build something and put it out there. And do that as quickly as you possibly can. I can't stress how important it is to kind of get it out into the world and let people start using something to really learn if you've made a mistake or not, right? Your tests are okay, but they're tests. They're not really real, right? But actually going out there and making something, putting something into the market, like an early product. So I worked with a team once where we were working with a really big car company, or they're related to cars, and they had this idea for an app, right? Or at least they had this opportunity where they had a lot of data and they didn't know what to do with it, and they wanted to create some sort of experience on an iPhone that would make people want to use this app and get to know their brand better and so on. So they hired a really big consulting firm to solve this problem. But that really big consulting firm was going through a moment of crisis of their own, and they decided they were going to hire us to work in parallel with them to see if our method worked, how it compared against their method. So both of us were like competing against each other. And so basically what happened is they, they hired us after they had already been going 3 weeks. And then basically in one day, we did as much work as they did in the first 3 weeks, right? And then what happened is a week went by, right? And we had a prototype, right? A week went by and they had organized a meeting, right? And then another week went by and we had a first version of a product, right? And another week went by and they had that meeting, right? To decide about the next meeting. And this kind of continued for another couple of weeks, and we were finally like, okay, we're ready to go. And they were like, we're not showing this to the client because we're terrified, right? Because they're gonna, they're paying us a lot of money for all of the hours that we're burning, and you basically shorten all those hours, right? And that was very scary for them. Since then, they've worked it out in their own way. They can still bill a lot of hours, but they're actually getting shit done, which is good. But what we ended up doing, one of the other things that really frightened them about that experience and that app was that the client, which they did show the client the app eventually, was like, yeah, but it's not finished. We can't put it out in the market. We're a massive brand, right? Everybody knows us, and this is kind of, it's not complete, right? And we said, look, I tell you what, let's put it out, right? And we'll put it out under another brand name. We'll make up one, and right? So we made up a brand name, and we put this thing out into the world to see how it works. And we got feedback, and we made it better, and we changed it, and we made it better and better and better. And lo and behold, a few months later, that massive company announced that they had bought this little startup, right? And they gave them a great press release and whatever, and they now have brought this app in-house, branded it themselves, took it over, and went ahead and did it, right? So, like, you have to realize how hard, like, making solid decisions is for big companies. But it's also hard for us as individuals because you're taking a risk, right? You're risking, and in business, anybody who's studied business, anybody have an MBA here, right? Risk is what you're trying to mitigate all the time, right? And the new way of working, these ways of working and creating technology and creating software and creating services and hardware are all much, much higher risk than business has ever been. And so we learn to make decisions because we know we can roll them back. We make small decisions. So everybody's heard fail fast? Who hasn't heard of fail fast as an expression? So the expression that everybody chases in the valley and in tech communities everywhere is fail fast, right? But I've always thought that they're missing something. So I think it's fail fast and learn something. Because if you're just failing fast over and over and over, making mistakes, you're an idiot, right? It's just you're not going anywhere. You're just failing over and over and over again, right? However, if you fail quickly and you learn something from that failure and you change what you're doing, right? Then you're going to do something different the next time, and it's going to be better, and it's going to get incrementally better and better and better. And that's why something like Lean came about, which is basically build, measure. And those of you who are studying this stuff will get into it and learn. So what that means is you build something, you put it out into the world, but you have some sort of measure for whether it's good or not. You see how it does on that measure, and you basically learn from that, and then you take what you have learned, and then you build something else, right? And you make it better and better and better. And that cycle continues. It's called Lean Startup Method, but it's basically, you're taking, if anybody studied science here, you're taking the scientific method and applying it to business, right? You're looking for empirical evidence that you're doing something right or wrong, and then making decisions based on that. And then, the one thing that you do when you're doing this is you iterate. So, iteration, right? So that's the next step of this, is you've built something, you've put it into the world, you've created something, you've created this wonderful thing that's out there, but now you need to make it better. And you iterate on it. And it's software, and now it's starting to bleed into hardware. There are ways that this works. So you've got product design, and then you have product development. And then you have product delivery. Now, in the old world of making anything, right, and even in the old world of making software when I was a kid, this would be year-long processes, right? You would take 6 to 8 months to design something. You would take a year to build it, right? And then you would take like ages to get it out into the world. You think about it, we were sending them off on floppy disks, right? And then, but even after that, it started to get a little bit quicker, right? the design got a little bit shorter, the development got faster because the languages we were using and the software we were using got better, the frameworks got better, and then delivery was quicker because we had better ways of getting things out into the world. And you can imagine when the internet hit and you weren't releasing hard copies of anything anymore, that went even faster, right? So your delivery was really rapid, and so your software had to get quicker, and your development in each phase had to get quicker and quicker and quicker. Until what happened is that these things have become so quick, these little cycles, right? That companies like Wix and Facebook, like Wix releases 70 times in a day. So they update their software 70 times in a day, right? That means that somebody in there is receiving some kind of bug report or has an idea or creates something, wants to do something. Somebody designs that, builds it, and releases it within a workday, right? 72 times, right? It's incredible. It's why your apps on your phone update every week now, right? Or even sooner sometimes for some of them, because these cycles have got so tight. So to make this work, to make these things connect and work, we've found new ways, new models of how to do this work. So for example, product design is now governed by, a lot of the time, what we call lean, what I was talking about here. This allows us to rapidly iterate on ideas, right? This lean idea. And then product development, we have agile, which allows us to develop in a very iterative way with a lot of practices and things that engineers do and so on to make it easier to get things out quickly. Like you make a decision, you choose something, you move on, next thing, and you keep going. And then product delivery, we have what is now DevOps. So this is continuous delivery, DevOps, and so on. So what this means is that in the old days, what would happen is when you finished programming some software, there is a team called a QA team, right? And they would check it and write tests and try and break it, basically. And they would find a whole bunch of bugs. And then they would pass those bugs back to the engineers, and then they would try and fix all the bugs, and then they would pass it back. And there was this really long cycle that would happen of trying to break it and fix it and break it and fix it. And so within here, they came up with an environment where most of that could be automated. Engineers, when they're in Agile, actually write the tests, right? And they're constantly running the tests to make sure that they haven't broken anything, so that by the time it reaches, it's getting ready for product delivery, all those tests are run, and they're sure that everything is working okay and so on. Occasionally a bug slips through, but it's not like it was in the old days. And this gets DevOps, or in the ideal word, no ops, means you don't have developers working on operations. All of that becomes automated. And that allows you to do these rapid iterative releases, right? So these three things together kind of allow iteration to happen. Does that make sense? So basically, you've got these connected things called, I don't know, the pentagon of product owners. It's not called that. I just made it up tonight. I don't actually know what that is. But the thing is that that's kind of the point of product, right? So a product owner doesn't have to think about everything in advance. A product owner becomes a master of modeling, right? Creating models of everything, right? And that's how you tell your stories. You understand what's underlying things so that you can create examples, right? Great storytellers, the best TED Talks, right? It's because they can take complex ideas, tell a simple story. And the reason that they can make that connection is because they understand the model, they understand what's underneath it. And so great product owners, good product owners, they know how to use Jira and Pivotal Tracker and draw wireframes and so on. Those are good product managers, right? They have all these tools they can use. But great product managers study something deeper. Great product managers study things like semiotics, which is the study of understanding what symbols mean. So it's all about what do things mean. Like every letter, every symbol, every icon, everything that's out there, like it's understanding the meaning behind things. They study things like semantics, which is about how do people speak, how do people express things, how do people describe things, how do people use words, right? They study systemics, Right? This is the understanding of how things work. How do different things relate to each other, and how do they interconnect, and how they affect each other, causes and effect, and so on. And they study things like psychology, which is trying to understand why people are so fucking crazy, right? Because we are, right? We don't make a lot of sense. We make stupid decisions. We have different ideas depending on our mood. Like we have these, chemicals in our brain, oxytocin, dopamine, all, serotonin, and so on. And in different measures at different times, depending on what we eat, depending on how much we slept, depending on what the weather's like, and so on, we're completely different, right? And so psychology is sort of trying to put some sort of wrap around that and really understand why people are making the decisions they're making. There's actually a great evolution of psychology, which I love, where it brings a lot of these things together, which is behavioral economics. Right? Behavioral economics is a great sort of right? It's a great study of understanding how people react to things and understanding the craziness that is human behavior, right? And so these are the kind of things that great product managers get into. They get in, and they might not study it I'm going to go sit in a book and whatever. It might be as light as reading a book that they heard about that's on the subject. Or it might be going to a talk and listening to somebody lecture about this stuff. But they're curious about it. They're curious, we are curious, to understand how things work and how they fit together and how we communicate them and what they mean and what they mean to different people. I worked at a great market research company that had 14 statisticians, right? Which means that these people studied the meanings of things. And what they would do is we had a study, we paid a lot of money to basically figure out what black meant, right? It seems so simple, right? Black is black. But then, if you take black in one culture and you take black in another culture, it means something completely different, right? And so understanding that made a difference. And so as a product manager, if I understand these things, what colors mean in different places, then I can understand that if I put something red in my product, that it's going to mean something completely different, i.e. passion and food, to somebody in China, as opposed to here, where red has an overlap with passion, but also means blood, death, and gore, right? And so these understanding the relationships between words and so on become really powerful tools in your toolkit. So these kinds of things and that curiosity is what drives product people. And the best product people that you meet are the people who really get passionate about this stuff. And this allows me to come up with this without thinking about it, right? Because it's just a model that needs to be expressed. I could have expressed this in 100 different ways, but for now, for tonight, we got the Pentagon of product management. Thank you very much. So, I'm going to take a drink of water and answer questions.
I've heard before that in order to be great at product, you have to be great at influencing people and convincing people to your ideas. What are your thoughts on that?
So, if you're right, it's really easy to convince people. Although I don't know if I should say that in this particular political climate. But yeah, in product anyway, if you're, what we do is we go back to empiricism, right? And so we go back and say, okay, is this true or not? And we're going to go test it. And if there's any doubt, if anybody's saying, well, I think it's this and I think it's that, you go back and you test it. And then you can come back and say with a certain amount of assurance that this is the correct path and I made the right decision. So yes, it's important to be able to convince people of things, but some people can do it through charisma, right? Other people do it through logic. Other people do it through manipulation. Like it depends on who you are and how you act. And different product managers have very different personalities. So yes, convincing people makes sense, but it depends on who you have to convince, and it also depends on what works for you. And you kind of got to figure that out for yourself. But I don't think it's a prerequisite. Like it's something that as you do product, you'll get more and more certain, and the more certain you are, the easier it is to convince people. I'll add something to that. So, as I said,
Project equals plan, and product equals vision.
If I had to say there were 3 words that describe product management, it's hold the vision, right? And it's not always your vision, right? It might be somebody else's vision. The thing is, you have to take ownership of that vision, get passionate about it, and understand it, and then own that vision, because it is your job to keep every stakeholder, every team member, everybody involved, customers, everybody focused on that vision, right? And so that's a lot of the convincing, is having a solid framework for your vision. And visions don't have to be solid. You've seen inside of here, there's a ton of kind of iterating and changing and learning and lessons, so you're gonna make mistakes. But think about it this way. If your vision is a mountain in the distance, that mountain is kind of cloudy. You can describe it, you can point it out, you can say that's the vision we're heading for, but you can't tell them exactly what it looks like. You may not even know if it's got trees or snow, right? Because it's cloudy, you can't see it, but you know where it is. Your job is to get to that mountain. Now, the path is not always straight, right? Sometimes you're gonna hit a river and turn left and have to walk for kilometers or miles before you cross and then go over. But you know once you've gone over that you're turning back towards that mountain, because that's your vision, and that's what you're trying to get to. So getting everybody to understand that, getting everybody to be okay with the fact that that's my vision, but I only know the next 10 steps. I can't create a roadmap for you. I don't know what's over that hill. I could create a roadmap for you, but I'm guessing, right? I have no idea if it's going to be true or not, right? Because until I get to the top of that hill, I can't actually see what I'm going to see. So I don't know what's going to happen. So you have to have the confidence that that's the vision, and that everybody understands that vision, and you don't always know all the steps to get there. You just know that you can if you keep heading in that direction. And so that's a really good way of having the framework to convince people of things. Does that help? Okay. Other questions?
Can you talk about some of the tools that you use, specifically maybe like the prototype and testing, like in terms of digital products?
So it really depends on who I'm working with. Like different people use different tools, and I try not to impose any tools. Actually, it's not I try not to impose. In a good agile team, what happens is that you're all equal, right? You all have your own expertise. So your tech guy makes tech decisions, or your tech woman makes tech decisions. Like I shouldn't override their decisions. I'm not a project manager, product. So their job is to figure out the technology. The designer and UX, right? The designer has to make emotional decisions, decisions that are going to deal with the emotions of the person who's looking at it, and that's their choice. I don't override that unless I have a business reason to do so. UX, their goal is to make the best experience for the user, and they make those decisions, right? As a product person, my decisions are basically prioritization. I decide which features get made and which ones get made first. That's my goal. But just in the same way that I can't tell the tech guy which stack to use, he can't tell me which feature to prioritize, right? So we make our own decisions. So that goes for the tools as well, right? And so I can tell you some of the stuff that I use and that I use with some of the people I work with. So to track product, I use Pivotal Tracker, right? I've used Mingle and Jira and Trello and tons of other things, and for whatever reason, Pivotal Tracker works really well for me. For those who don't know, it's a tool that manages the work that you have to do. Like I talked about user stories, it kind of keeps track of those user stories and decides what's going to happen next. For prototyping, I tend to use Keynote. Right? I use Keynote to build animated prototypes that are interactive with people who click on. I use Keynote to tell stories. I use Keynote to do wireframing. I use Keynote to do everything, right? Because I find it's the most versatile tool for me. I have a guy that I work with who loves Balsamiq, right? Thinks it's a great tool. Balsamiq is you can make things look really sketchy and whatever, and just throw on different elements like this is an image, and this is a drop-down menu, and this is this and that, and you can rapidly create prototypes, right? So wireframing tool, we use that a lot. When I'm working with tech teams, I get them to use something called code climate a lot of the time, which looks at the code and tells somebody who's not a coder, right, what the quality of that code is on different metrics. So code climate's a great tool to help us out. Other kind of tools are,
Oh, that's great.
yeah. So those are my choices. But again, those are very personal things. And like one of the If you do nothing else about product, go and read what's called the Agile Manifesto. Right? The Agile Manifesto is just 4 rules that governs all of Agile. And the first one is people and interactions over processes and tools. Meaning that it's way more important to understand people and their interactions and how they work together than it is to understand, to use the right tool, like, and the right process. It doesn't mean that the tools and processes aren't important at all. It just means they're not as important as the people in the interactions. So figuring out who your team is and how they're going to talk to each other is way more important than everybody agreeing that we're going to use Trump. Right?
Hey, when consulting or going into a new company with a team that's been working together for a long time, you ever experience any pushback or difficulty trying to have them work with you as opposed to against you?
Trust, right? We talked about that right at the top. So trust is a very big deal. And when you're working through what I call that hippie stuff, like where the team is trying to get to know each other and work well together and so on, that's hard work. That's way harder than writing code or designing a wireframe. Right? The hard part is the human part. How do we get along with each other? How do we communicate? How do we find common ground? I mean, think about how long most people date before they get engaged and get married, right? Or move in together, or any big decision. Right? It takes a while because you want to kind of get to know that person and figure out where their weaknesses are and where their strengths are and how they react to things and their moods and all that kind of stuff. It's very similar in teams. You enter into a team and you got to figure everybody out, and they're trying to figure you out. So there's an interesting loop between transparency. By the way, I should apologize for my writing, it's never been good. And trust, right? And so these two things form a nice little feedback loop, right? So the more transparent people are, the more open and honest and so on they are, the more trust builds, right? And the more trust builds, the more people feel comfortable to be transparent and open and honest, right? And so this is this wonderful feedback loop that spirals upwards and creates a massively productive team. Of course, this can go in the opposite direction, which often happens when I'm walking into a company and they're trying to figure out why their tech teams are failing and so on. It's because this is in a downward spiral, right? Where the CEO doesn't trust the team, and so the team starts hiding stuff, so the CEO gets more pissed off and doesn't trust it more, and you get this downward spiral, and it's just like boom. And most of us have been in a company, maybe it's not technology, we've seen that happen, right? It happens all the time. So here's the thing. You cannot introduce trust by force. Like, I can't walk in and say, you need to trust you. Okay, go ahead, trust each other. Right? It will never work. However, what I can do is I can go in and start being transparent. I can go in, talk about my life, talk about things openly, maybe talk about a conversation I had with the CEO and be like, it's a bit tough, right? Whatever, I can just be completely transparent. By that transparency, it starts trust, right? And that kind of gets that engine going again, right? And then you can start spiraling it upwards. The difficult part for me is to convince the CEO to do that, right? But again, with the team can start introducing more transparency into what they're doing, and that will open up the trust, right? And so that's how I deal with it. So I go in, and yes, there's going to be pushback and resistance. I just need to be as open and honest as I can. I'll say one thing for product owners, ego doesn't work. If you have a big ego, you can be a good product owner, but I don't think you will ever be great, right? It just doesn't work. Like I have a big ego, but I've learned to put it aside, right? And just go, look, as much as that pains me, that's not important. What's important is where I am, and put that out there. So it is something I can talk from personal experience. It's something you can learn to do. Like, it doesn't mean that, oh, you have an ego, you're done. It just means you have to learn to put that aside for this reason. That's what creates that opening. Other questions?
You talk about the product really important focuses vision and prioritization. So how do you know, what is right, and how do you know something else might be back, and what is kind of like the process to do that?
Decisions. So It's different in every product, but for software in general, release small features very often and measure like crazy. Do people use this? Do they need it? But I kind of like this first. So what I do is I love UX people who make paper prototypes, right? And so they'll just quickly throw a paper prototype together so it's got sticky notes and whatever, and they'll walk up to people and start seeing how they react to it, right? And they start, because what happens is basically the closer you get to production, the more your cost goes up, right? So if you can test all the way back here, where you're far away from production, right? The more you learn back here, the more advantage you get, because that's a curve that goes like that, right? And so you don't want to wait. And so paper prototyping is one of the really big things I find for software and for hardware. Like the Palm Pilot, I don't know if anyone remembers the Palm Pilot, but when the guy first thought of the Palm Pilot, I can't remember his name now, I can't believe that, he basically walked around with a block of wood, right, for about 2 months, right? And just kept pulling it out of his pocket and handing it and whatever, just to get used to the size, and he changed it and he created new ones and so on. Prototyping, rapid prototyping, this process here, really, really important as early as you possibly can for anything that matters. Now you don't want to go crazy. Like if you're choosing to change your login button from white to gray, like you don't need to prototype that and take it out there, right? Don't go nuts. Like, you can just do that and see how people react to it. But for things that are important, go and prototype. The things that aren't, that you can test live, that aren't, so things like a button color change and those kinds of things, we use A/B testing tools. And that depends on what stack, what technology you're using. So what an A/B testing tool is, or now it's what we call an AZ testing tool, right? It's you can have multiple iterations of the same page done slightly differently. And you're delivering a different page to different users, and you're seeing how they react to different pages, and you measure that. And oh, this one gets the most clicks, so this is the best design, right? So those are two things, rapid prototyping and A/B testing.
I guess a follow-up question on that. So almost before that step, before you even prototype, right? If you're trying to figure out a problem that someone has and needs to solve, I guess you have a tactic for kind of passing it without being immediate, like
So
figuring out.
yes, yes, there are a lot of tactics, but basically UX, I mean that's the core of what UX do. Like good UX researchers, that's what they do. So the job of a UX person is to listen to what people want and then figure out what they actually need, right? That's the main job of a UX, because people have no idea what they want. They just don't know most of the time. Steve Jobs understood that implicitly, right? But he would look at what they say they want, and he would work back, understanding the systems and the layers underneath it to figure out what they actually needed, right? And would then create that. And so design thinking is is created to do that. So there's a whole bunch of brainstorming techniques. You can actually go to the D School, and there's some great videos, the D School website, Stanford, I think it's dschool.stanford.edu. And you can look at the videos of how design thinking works. You can look at a 90-minute workshop online and all that stuff. And there's great tools for figuring out how to do things. One of the best tools in there is an interview tool, which I don't have time to run through, but it basically shows you a great rhythm to interviewing people so that you can get to their emotion, right? And getting to the point of emotion is where you get truth, right? And from that, you can get a lot out of somebody and a lot out of the session, right? And so that kind of work is really where it sits. But the best thing is to actually get out of the building, go talk to people, deal with them, figure that things out that way, and then come up with ideas and rapidly prototype them and test them, like one after the other. As I say, there's a bunch of different techniques inside of design thinking. It's one of the best things I've come across. Another great tactic is Google Ventures came out with a design sprint, which is a 5-day, full-day exercise. I run them all the time. They're fantastic. It's 5 days, like 7 or 8 people in a room. You basically don't leave all day long, and you have to have, there's one role which I love, which is the decider. So this is usually the CEO of the company who has this role. Like, the funny thing is that people think that product design and companies and agile and all this stuff is a democracy, and hell no, it's not. Right? It is not a democracy. It is a dictatorship. Right? But what you do is you have to have intelligent dictators, right? People who are listening to everything that's going on and knowing the only way they're going to stay in power, right, is if they're listening to everybody and making good decisions, all right? And so the decider has that job. They can override everybody else. We could do all the empirical exercise in the world, and they'll say, nope, I want to do it this way. But I tell you what, in that room, they have to answer to those people and explain why they want it done that way. They can't just go, no, I want it that way, right? So the decider can decide, but has to explain it. And that rule is wonderful. So in this 5-day sprint, you can go from, I have a problem that I'm not sure about, to prototyping and actually testing a solution in 5 days. It's great. So Google, you can, there's a book called Sprint by Jake Knapp. You can look that up from Google. That's what. Other questions? Who here actually is looking to be a product manager and is not currently? Okay, who is a product manager already? Great. So you guys know most of this stuff already. Good.
Yeah, I was just curious. One of the challenges I've had being in product management is, like a lot of companies, there might be like 40 plus projects going on with different product owners owning each of those projects. And I mean, I don't know if that's common, but it seems common. And so, with that said, how, in your experience, like what have you done to leverage some of those other teams with the product? Because it's all intertwined together overall with that overall vision. But then each kind of team has their own set of like executive objectives, and KPIs and all that stuff. So I'm just curious to know like what your perspective is on that in terms of how to help bring that product together and make it the greatest product ever.
Right. So there's a lot of people who have dealt with that problem, and people deal with it in different ways.
Yeah.
Some people like Apple and stuff put in place SAFe, which is like a whole scale agile thing, which to me is like waterfall inside of agile, which is bizarre. But anyway, so for me, what I found is that I took some lessons from Spotify. So Spotify is one of the best agile companies in the whole world, based in Sweden. I actually almost thought I was going to go work there for a while. And so when Spotify first started, there was one agile team building the entire piece of software, right? And then as they grew, the team split, and there was like one team that was building the consumer side, and one team that was building like the publishing, admin kind of side, right? And then as they grew even more, so in the first thing, it was one for all, right? In the second instance, they were split by user, the consumer and the admin user. And then as they grew even more, their team split up where one team was doing search, another one was doing discovery, another one was doing preferences and so on. And so they were split by functionality, right? So those are 3 different examples of how to split your teams up, right? And so different companies, it makes sense for different companies at different times in the life cycle of the product that you organize your teams differently. What's important with Agile is that you keep the teams together. You don't keep splitting them up and whatever. Why? Why would you not split your teams up?
Communication.
Right? Because it's good, they're gonna have to learn each other all over again and have to start from scratch and whatever. So you try and keep your teams together. Like you rotate people, but you keep them together. So now let's think about what we have. We have an organization that has 40 odd teams, right? And each team is doing their own thing. And more than that, if they're doing Agile properly, each one is applying Agile differently. Because the whole point of Agile is not to stick to one type of Agile, it's to figure out and continuously make your team process better, right? So each team has gone in slightly different directions, right? So now you have 40 teams, right? 4, 5, 6 people per team, and they're all working differently, but they're all working on the same problem. So this is how I scale Agile. And it's from lessons from Spotify and from some other companies. So one thing is that once a week, all of the disciplines get together. So all of the people of the same discipline get together. So once a week, all of the UX get together, no matter what team they're on, and they spend at least an hour together just sharing what's going on in their team, talking about their problems, trying to solve things for each other, and just interacting.
You're talking about one UX meeting across the 40 some odd teams.
No, what I'm saying is
You're
that
saying
if each team has a UX or there are
Also,
20,
each individual scrum, okay.
Yeah, right, so
Okay, yeah.
all of the UXs get
Yeah.
together at least once a week,
Yeah.
all the engineers get together, all the product learners, all the agile coaches, like
Yeah.
whatever you have in your team, all the disciplines get together at least once a week for an hour, right? Absolutely mandatory.
Yeah.
And they just talk about things and get it. So an amazing amount of sharing happens in that, right? That's one thing. The second thing is that you'll find that when you have all these teams, they don't all have to interact with each other. So this team over here is working on this part of the product, and this team is working on a totally different part of the product. It doesn't matter if they talk to each other that much, because they're not really affecting each other. However, this team over here and this team over here are working in adjacent parts of the product. So what we do with them is every morning after their scrum, so after their stand-up, right, where they spend 5 minutes telling each other, everybody on the team answers 3 questions. What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? Do I have anything blocking me? Right? So each person on the team goes around and answers these 3 questions in the morning. It takes about 5 minutes if it's done properly. Right? So what happens is as soon as they're finished, each team has finished their stand-ups, which all happen at exactly the same time, right? Then the product managers from these 2 teams, or at least some people do product managers, some people just do a representative from each team gets together and they have a little stand-up, right? Where they do the same thing. What did my team do yesterday? What's my team doing today? Is there anything blocking us, right? And that will highlight problems between them. And so these little scrums that, or these stand-ups that happen afterwards, they're a way of interconnecting the teams together that matter. And so they'll spring up between these 4 teams for 6 weeks, and then 2 of them will drop off because they're going on to something else, and another one will join because they're adjacent, and it'll kind of move around that way. So you now have single discipline across everybody getting together. You have the individual teams that are related to each other, talking to each other on a daily basis. There's one other ingredient, which is standards, right? Which is like agreeing standards. There's something that you just have to agree to standards. So for example, the engineers have to agree to naming conventions. They have to agree to certain paradigms and design patterns and how they code. They have to agree to, they don't even have to use the same technology, but they have to agree to what the endpoints look like. So a lot of the time now, technology can be little black boxes, right? The code is little black boxes. And what's important is not what's in the boxes. What's important is how those boxes communicate with each other, right? So they have to agree to what that language is. So it doesn't matter what's happening inside. When I give you this, you spit out that. When I give you this, you spit that out. And as long as they understand what those endpoints are, they can connect them together. So there's a certain amount of standards. For UX, it's really good to get some sort of standards. Like, are we going to do high fidelity wireframes, or are we going to do low fidelity? Like, just some standards along the way. And that's it. Pretty much I found that it works really well. GE transformed 800 teams into Agile more successfully than anybody else due to a really strong leader that went in there and a number of consultants and help that they had. And that's pretty much what they did, is they found a way to manage those connections. The worst thing you can do is put middle managers in. Like sticking a layer of middle management above these teams just immediately breaks the communication, causes problems, and whatever. Does that help?
Yeah.
And some ideas. There's probably a bunch more. I actually have a book that's coming out in January, which is all about that. It's all about how to make Agile work in an organization that wasn't Agile before. Like, how do you fix Agile to really work? And that's a big part of it. How do you scale it up amongst people?
How would you prioritize fixing things versus building new things when a product is messy place?
So, at any one time, I'll have so when you first start a product, it's all new features, right? It's brand new, everything is new, nothing existed before, so your list of things to do are all brand new features. Then, as you start working, a few things start to enter. You start having chores to do, like things that are not about the user but still have to be done. Data that has to be organized, things that have to be cleansed, stuff like that. These chores pop up. So now you have new features and chores. And then as you're turning out these new features, then suddenly there are little bugs and stuff being introduced. So now you have new features, you have chores, and you have bugs, right? And then, of course, once these features are out there and people are using them, they're coming back, customer services and everybody's coming back with improvements to these features. So now you have new features, improvements, chores, and bugs. So what I do is as I'm doing my backlog, so my backlogs or my list of work that needs to be done, I don't plan it, like in some Agile, you plan it for like the weeks ahead or the week ahead. I don't do that. I just plan it as it's ready to go. And what I do is I make sure that I have the right balance of those things. But I'm really strict about making sure that I have all of those on a regular basis. So people say, no, it's not time to do new features. We have to improve the old ones. I'll be like, yeah, I'll put the emphasis on the old ones, but I still will insert a new feature now and again to make sure it's moving forward. So that's how I do it. I balance those four things in each other. And the balance between them changes depending on the business need, the tech needs, and so on. Yeah.
So you talked about how the key role of product is to hold the vision. What's the process you go through to create or decide upon the vision in the first place, and what research, if any, you use to inform that vision?
This kind of goes back to the last answer I gave you. So what happens is most products nowadays come from somebody observing a problem or seeing a need somewhere and saying, okay, we're going to either solve that problem or address that need or fulfill that need. So that doesn't mean it has to be like a negative thing. It could be entertainment. People are bored, right? When they're doing X, Y, Z, let's give them something to do while they're waiting in the bus stop or whatever, right? So Candy Crush comes up, right? So what happens is you're looking for a need or an opportunity, and then you're addressing that. And so your vision is actually driven by the need of the user, right? So figuring out what they need will tell you what your vision needs to be, right? Now, in bigger companies, there might already be a vision in place, and so you're trying to look for where those things match. The need of the user matches the vision already in place. And if they don't, that's when really difficult conversations happen, right? Because you have to then walk in and go, I know this is the vision of the company, but it doesn't seem like anybody needs this. So either we need to address a different set of people who do need this, or we need to do something different than just our vision, right? And that's the job of a product person, is to have that discussion, and that's why you want to be backed by empiricism, you want to be backed by tests and users and things that say, look, there isn't a market here, right? Maybe there is one for this product, we need to find that market before we build this thing, right? And we make those switches. So does that help a little bit? It's kind of, it's a little bit soft because the vision, as I say, might have to shift. But your vision essentially you drive that from the problem you need to solve, right? And then you test your ideas. Like, so each hypothesis you create is an idea to solve that problem, right? And so while you're in this early phases of this, you probably don't have a vision yet, right? You have an idea, and as you go through this, your idea gets more and more solid, right? And then your vision becomes more and more solidified, and then you're now heading towards something because you're making decisions, you're building something, and so for that you have to have some idea of what that vision is. But there's a process to kind of get there. Does that make sense? The process is exploring the user, essentially.
You asked, oh sorry.
I just want to know, time check?
Yeah, last question here.
Okay.
You asked who has an MBA.
Yeah.
How effective do you think an MBA is? That's for
So-
product managers.
So what I found is that there are tons, like product management is a really odd like job description when you look at it on the web, because they're asking for all kinds of different things. And the worst thing is that half of them are actually looking for project managers, but people stopped applying for that, so they changed the name, even though they didn't change the job description, so it gets really confusing, right? So you need to learn, like if they're telling you you're managing time, cost, and resources, that's project, don't do that, right? Go to product. So people come to product from all kinds of different walks in life. I've taught like over 200 product managers now in LA, and I've had lawyers and accountants and business people and actors and all kinds come in from all kinds of backgrounds. The trick is that product managers generally tend to be jack of all trades. They tend to be curious, and they tend to learn things rapidly and never become expert at anything, right? They're 80% good at everything, quickly. And that's that's kind of a trait that I see amongst product managers. And so when you first enter into the role, you're gonna bring your strength with you, the parts that you know. Because remember, we said there's 3 overlaps, right? Which is business, design, and tech in this world. And so you're trying to cover all these. So if you're coming in with an MBA, you're probably very strong on the business side. So what you're going to want to do is make sure you have a really strong tech and a really strong UX with you to balance you out, right? But what you want to do is not just sit on your laurels. You then want to spend time learning from these people. Surround yourself with people who are better than you, right? And learn from them. And then you will then get stronger at these other disciplines, right? And then in time it'll kind of balance itself out. You might always be better at business, but you know, this, and the same thing applies to engineers. It applies to all those roles. But for you guys, MBAs, look for people who are uncertain about their business, where you can truly bring value from that standpoint, right? And so, for example, if you want to work for a startup, I'm just using that as an example, you want to find a startup that's probably founded by an engineer, right? Who has really great ideas and wants to build this thing and so on, but doesn't understand business and how to model it. So your MBA will be more value there. And you can learn from this technically good person, right, while you're there, right? So use what you have, get a job that you like, right? The worst thing you can do is go and get a job that you don't like. So when you're going for a job, interview the company just as hard as they're interviewing you. Because if you get into a company that's not your culture and you don't have shared values, you're gonna have a horrible time. So it's better to spend the time up front, even if it means being broke a little bit longer, to find a company you actually like and that meets your particular skill set, or needs your particular skill set.
Cool. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, everybody.